Hi guys! In this video I'm going to show you how to make my rollout sugar cookies and how to make the royal icing that goes with them. In the next video I'll show you some decorating tips and how to make some cute little succulent cookies. So if you're more interested in just the decorating part, go ahead and skip to that video. If you just want to know how to make the icing, skip to about halfway in this video. And if you want to start from the beginning and make some cookies, go ahead and keep watching. Okay, let's make the cookies. For me, this is the easiest part. It doesn't take very long. It's only a few ingredients, and decorating takes a lot longer and takes a lot more practice. So here we go. You will need 2 sticks of softened butter, so make sure it's room temperature and soft. You'll need 1 egg. You'll need 1 tablespoon of vanilla. Usually I use regular vanilla, but you know, these desperate times, all they had was imitation. You will need 1 teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of baking powder, not soda, powder. You need 1½ cups of powdered sugar, and you'll need about 2½ to 2 3/4 cups of flour. So let me get some of this out of the way so we can get started. I use this really cool paddle that my husband got me. It has a scraper on the side. It can be a little noisy, but it cuts down on the amount of times you have to stop and scrape the edges of the bowl. So this is what I use. But I like to put in my first ingredients before I put the paddle on, just to make it a little easier. So we're gonna start with the butter and the sugar. You wanna make sure it's nice and soft so that it can all incorporate really well and you can get this nice, smooth, creamy base to get started. This is one of the few recipes I've seen that calls for powdered sugar. I don't know the science behind it, but I know that these cookies don't have to chill, which I love. That's awesome. So I've got 1½ cups here. I'm gonna go ahead and pour that right over. I'm gonna use the same measuring cup here in a second for the flour. And then I'm gonna put this on. And I'm gonna mix this up until it is nice and smooth and creamy and everything is completely incorporated. You can't tell it was 2 separate ingredients. While I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and measure out my flour. And I'm going to start sifting together my flour with my other 2 dry ingredients, so my baking powder and my salt. This is about 2 cups. I'm going to pour that on. I'm going to turn this up just a little bit so it gets nice and creamy and all mixed together. That looks good. So next thing we're going to do is add the egg. We're going to mix it up a little bit more. We don't want to over mix it when the egg is in there, but we do want to make sure that it gets all broken up and all incorporated. And this is about 3/4 cup. So 2 3/4 cup with the dry ingredients. We're going to sift that together. Actually, before I really get into that, I'm going to add my vanilla to this also. It's not quite a whole tablespoon, but that's all we got left. And it's, you know, tail end of quarantine here, so we're gonna make do. It'll still taste fine. I just like it really vanilla-y, but it'll be okay. So I'm gonna sift together the rest of our dry ingredients. There's a blooper. And then I'm gonna go ahead and scrape down the sides. It does build up a little bit, but I still like my scraper paddle. And I'm gonna scrape some of what's on the paddle that didn't quite get mixed in back down into it. Give it one more quick mix, and then I'm gonna start adding my dry ingredients just a little bit at a time. So I'm probably gonna add about 1/3 of the flour mixture. And then once you can't tell there's any dry flour in there, we're gonna add another third. Then we're gonna add the last third. At the end, it should look pretty dough-like. If it's a little soft, that's okay. You can always add more flour once we start kneading it. And if it is too crumbly, you kind of just have to work with it. There's only been a couple times when I was making this that it was just like I had to completely start over. A lot of factors can come into play. The size of your egg, how soft your butter was, you know, how exact your measurements were for your flour. But most of the time this recipe, when I've done it, and I've gotten pretty used to it, it's pretty foolproof. But it's starting to come together like a dough. We've got a little bit of mixture left. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and get a piece of saran wrap ready. You can do it right on the counter, just make sure it's clean. When we actually roll out the cookies, I will re-wipe off the counter, sanitize it, and then just roll them out right on the counter. But I like to take it out and put it on the saran wrap just because sometimes it's a little sticky, and instead of trying to, you know, manage it, it's a lot easier if it's all wrapped up. So I'm gonna try to get as much off of our mixer as we can, our beater. The only not cool thing about this mixer is how many little bars there are. It makes it harder to clean out. And normally I'm pretty OCD about getting as much off of this as possible, but since I'm recording, I'll try to refrain from sitting here for 10 minutes doing that. That's good enough. Okay. So we're done with our mixer for now, until it's time to make the icing. I'll get it back out. I'm just gonna scrape this all off the sides. So like this batch, it's a little softer. Not anything to worry about. It's not gonna be quite like Play-Doh, but it's definitely a dough. It's not a batter. And I'm gonna dump it onto the saran wrap. And make sure I get everything out of my bowl. Drives me crazy when I'm watching like tasty videos and they don't scrape the bowl. My mom would be so mad. It makes me so mad. Okay. So I usually keep the same spatula around, and that's what I use to divide up the dough. Oops. Once I start working with it. So I have all the dough on saran wrap now, and usually I just kind of work it all together into one ball. You don't have to let this dough rest. I found it helps a little bit with just the structural integrity. You don't have to chill it, which is so cool. And you really, I mean, I could just start rolling this out right away and it'd be good to go. But I'm gonna wrap it up, let it sit for just a second, pretty much however long it takes me to clean off my workspace so I can start rolling out my dough. And then we will get started. So if you've gotten to this point, what you wanna do is now you wanna make sure that your oven is on. You wanna preheat it to 400 degrees. And you wanna get out some cookie sheets and some parchment paper. Sanitize my workspace and I've gotten a couple things ready. I've got a bowl with some flour in it so I can flour my surface and flour my rolling pin. I've got my cookie sheet with parchment paper on it. Kroger sells these parchment sheets that are already perfect size. So that's what I always use. I've got my cookie cutters, whatever cookie cutters you want, and my rolling pin. Did I say this? I don't even remember. This is the coolest thing ever. These ones can come off, and they came with some different sizes. So this is a 1/4 inch, so you don't have to worry about it being level. It'll just roll out perfectly for you, and all your cookies will all be the same. This is like the coolest investment. I don't know why I waited so long to get it. I think it was like $17 maybe, but I know you can get them on Amazon. So I highly recommend one of those. If you plan on making cookies like more than 3 times, it'll be worth it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take maybe about 1/5 of my dough, maybe a little more. And I'm gonna keep the rest covered up while I'm working. Just so it doesn't dry out around the edges. And I'm just gonna kind of work with it a little bit. Move these out of the way. Get my flour ready. Just a nice little coat there. Not too much, but you want to make sure it doesn't stick to your counter. As you're kneading it out a little bit, you can kind of feel if it's gonna stick or not. It's not sticking to my hands, so I don't think we need to knead more flour into it. If you're doing this and it's sticking to your hands and it's sticking to the saran wrap, what you can do is go ahead and like knead it out with more flour until it stops sticking to everything. And then you want to make sure that you reflour the surface before you start rolling it out. So I'm just going to start with it right in the middle. I'm going to add a little more flour on top and then kind of rub some on my rolling pin. And I'm just going to start rolling it out. Ooh. Of course I messed up the first one. If you mess it up, just smush it back together and keep going. If it sticks to your rolling pin, just add a little more on top. So there we go. It's all nice and even. And we can cut out our shapes. When you're cutting out shapes, you want to make sure you're baking a bunch of things that are the same size at the same time. Like I wouldn't want to have this little hexagon and this square on the same cookie sheet because the little one's going to cook a lot faster. So try to make sure everything is about the same size on your cookie sheet. I'm going to start off with this hexagon. I love hexagons right now. I don't know why. I got a set online that has 6 hexagons and they all just kind of fit into each other of all different sizes. So that's my favorite thing. So just cut out however many you can fit. If there's extra room, don't worry about it because we're going to take all this extra away and we're just going to roll it into the next batch. So if you want to just kind of mix it all together, you can. Then I'm going to use our spatula from earlier. I know it still has some dough on it, but it's fine. It's fine. And I'm just going to kind of pick up a corner. And then I'm going to put it on my cookie sheet. And just real gentle with them. Try to make sure that they keep their shape. If they stick, just be patient. Nice and easy. Usually I can fit about 8 on a cookie sheet. You don't want to overcrowd it. They really don't grow a whole lot, but you also don't want to have too many on the sheet because it'll take longer to cook. And that's all you gotta do. So after I have that done, I'm going to take this little extra bit that we pulled off and I'm going to take some more dough from the original pile, just mix those together really well. And I'm going to start this whole process over again until I've gone through all my dough. A little bit more flour. I'd always rather have too much flour than not enough flour on the workspace, just because sometimes if they get really stuck, it'll be hard to get them off while they're keeping their shape. And actually what I found is the more flour that you have in your dough, so like the sturdier your dough is, the more likely they'll keep their shape when you cook them. But this recipe is pretty good about not losing it. So when you cook them, they should stay in their shape. It's not like those internet fails you see where it, you know, turns into some other blob. I don't think I can fit anymore, but that's okay. And I'll just keep doing the same thing. We'll just do 6 hexagons. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention here is how long to bake the cookies, and honestly, I don't time it. I think the original recipe I had said 7 to 9 minutes. It's all gonna depend on your oven. It's all gonna depend on how big your cookies are. Once you've done this a couple times, you can really get into the hang of it and see, you know, when they're done just by looking at them. The key thing is to look to see when the middle of it is just barely dry. Also keep an eye on the bottoms of them too. You don't want them to get too brown. All right, so I've taken out the first batch of cookies. I like to take them out as soon as the tops don't look wet anymore, because I don't really like it when the bottoms get super golden. I like them to still be really soft. So as soon as the top doesn't look wet anymore, I take them out, but I let them chill on the cookie sheet for at least a couple minutes to make sure that they're really cooked through. And then after that, I'll transfer them to a wire cookie rack, cooling rack, whatever you call it. And they stay on that until they're completely cooled. I don't put them away until they're completely cooled, and usually I'll let them sit for a day before I ice them. Okay, so just to give you an example of how I like the bottom of my cookies to look, these were cooked on 2 separate cookie sheets at 2 different times, and to me this is burnt. I didn't keep a very good eye on it. Some people say that's fine. It tastes fine. It's still pretty soft. I'm probably not going to use it though. But that level of brown to me is overcooked. I feel like it's burned. It doesn't look as pretty when you package them up and present them. It's completely up to you. If you're good with that, go for it. Decorate it, eat it, do whatever you want. This is how the bottom of most of my cookies look when they're exactly how I like them. This is the front of it. This is the back. They look pretty similar. It's still completely cooked through though. It's very soft. And the softer it is when it's cooked, the softer it'll stay after you ice it and everything like that. So that's my example of burned and perfect. Okay, so now it's time for the icing. For this, I'm just going to use a normal paddle. You can use a whisk if you want to. I've tried both ways, but it really hasn't made that much of a difference, and I feel like the scraper paddle actually adds more bubbles. So I use just the normal paddle that came with my mixer. If you're doing it with a hand mixer, then you can just use the normal beaters that come with it. I've got 1 pound of powdered sugar here. 2 pounds come in a bag, so you can either weigh it out if you have a food scale. If not, you can eyeball it. I think it's supposed to be about 4 cups to a pound for powdered sugar, or you can just double this. I actually half the original recipe, which was for 2 pounds, because I found that usually I can ice 1 batch of cookies with half batch of icing, which is what I'm going to show you today. So I'm just doing it with 1 pound. If you want to double all of this stuff to make it easier on yourself and to give yourself some extra icing to play with, go for it. So I'm just going to put all of the powdered sugar into my mixer without making a mess. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the meringue powder and the cream of tartar right now. A lot of these you'll see where they say to take your meringue powder and mix it with water and whip it up and then add it to the powdered sugar, and I've tried that and it was really difficult, and I got the same result doing it this way. So we're just going to do it the easy way. Let me open this up. This is meringue powder. I got this at Walmart. You can get it at Walmart. Ooh, it's hard to open. Walmart, Hobby Lobby, Michael's. Cookie making has gotten pretty big, so it's pretty easy to find the materials now. But it's just an egg substitute pretty much. So you can make actual meringue powder, not meringue powder, meringue icing, buttercream icing with egg whites, sugar, and water and whip it up. That's how it was originally done. I know that it doesn't hurt you, but I'm weird about using the raw eggs because it never gets cooked. It's just the egg whites. So I like using meringue powder better. And yeah, that's just me. So you want about 2.5 tablespoons of this, and it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to level it or weigh it or anything like that. So we've got 1, 2, and this is a 1/2 tablespoon. There we go. This is optional. I read it one time. Somebody said to put a little bit of cream of tartar, whatever. I'm fancy, so we're gonna say tartar. They said to put a little bit of that if your icing wasn't setting up. There was one time years ago where there was like 3 batches of my icing that didn't set up, and I couldn't figure out why. There's a couple reasons that are possible. I'm just putting about 1/2 tablespoon of cream of tartar in here. So I tried using cream of tartar and then it set, and so now I use it every time. I don't know if it makes that big of a difference, but whatever, I keep using it. So you've got all the dry ingredients in here. I'm gonna go ahead and just mix it up a little bit just to kind of incorporate everything. Just like that. And then I'm gonna add my water. So this is actually pretty easy. The original recipe was for 3/4 cup. So we're gonna do 1/4 cup of water plus 2 tablespoons. Fun fact, a tablespoon is 1/4 cup. So there's 4 tablespoons in 1/4 cup. So if you ever have to half a quarter, it's 2 tablespoons. So I'm just gonna pour my water right on in. I'm gonna start with that 1/4 while I get the other 2 tablespoons. And I know you can pour it right on top, but I'm weird about it and I don't like it when the top of the thing gets dirty, so I stop it and put it back in. It's not gonna hurt it. So you wanna keep mixing it at low until it kind of gets like a honey-like texture. It should be pretty viscous, but all the powdered sugar should start getting wet. It should all start getting incorporated. After you've gotten that honey-like texture, that's when you're gonna up the speed. And I'll lift this up here in a second to show you. So this is what I mean by the honey-like texture. It kind of drips, well, it definitely drips off of the beater, and it's not very white yet. One cool thing is as it mixes, you'll be able to see that it'll get more and more white, and it'll get that really bright white color at the end. So now that we're at this honey stage, I can go ahead and up it to a medium speed. My mixer's on 4. And you're actually gonna let it mix for about 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, so you can see it started to get a little more white. It's definitely thickened up some, but we're not done yet. We're gonna make it go even faster, and we're gonna beat it until we get really stiff peaks. Almost there. Tiny bit more. Yep, I'm good with that. So what I mean by stiff peaks is these peaks are standing up pretty well by themselves. Yeah, The texture you want to go for initially with this is toothpaste. I've found that that's the easiest way to explain the different icing consistencies. Is you have toothpaste, and then on the opposite end you've got shampoo. So shampoo is what you're going to use, not actual shampoo, shampoo consistency is what you're going to use when you are flooding your cookies, which is what I'm about to show you how to do after we get our icing to the right consistencies. That's how you fill them all up. It'll level out, it'll be really nice and smooth. That's the base for most of your cookies. You're gonna use the flood icing, and that's gonna be like shampoo. The opposite end is gonna be like your piping and your details. So if you're doing like flowers or like the succulents I'm gonna show you, if you're doing writing, you want it to be more on the toothpaste end, which is like this. It's pretty sturdy. It's gonna dry a lot faster than the flood because there's not as much water in it. And it can be harder to work with because you have to actually like push harder when you're trying to get it out of the piping bag. But this is the texture that you want for like 3D flowers, any like fine line details. Anytime you don't want something to run, this is the texture that you want. So we're gonna actually work backwards here when we're making our colors. What I mean by that is, this is another technique I saw from somebody. We're gonna start with really thick icing, and if we need it thinner, we're gonna add water. So instead of like making it and going, yep, that's the thickness I need, and stopping, we're gonna make it all thick, and then we're gonna make some of it thinner if we need it to be thinner. This can also come in handy if you need the same color, but you need some thin icing and some thick icing. So say you want to try to do some like monochromatic or like some color. There's one trend I've seen where it's like all one color flood, and then they pipe with the same color on top of it, and just kind of gives it this subtle 3D look. Maybe it's like words or a flower or something, but so if you want to do something like that where you have the exact same color, thick and thin, this is an easy way to do that. So we are going to dye it first and then take out the thick that you need, and then make the rest of it thin. Okay, so I'm gonna get this ready to make into different colors. Okay, so now it's time to color our icing. I went ahead and moved it to a different bowl, and while I was getting everything cleaned up, I covered it with some saran wrap because you don't want it to dry out. So either if you have a lid for your bowl or saran wrap will do fine. Just make sure it's airtight so that it doesn't start drying, because that's what it's supposed to do, is dry. I also have a little bowl and a little spatula. That's just the easiest thing. You can use a regular spoon if you want. I have my food colorings. These ones are the Hobby Lobby brand. I'm 90% sure they're the exact same as the AmeriColor ones because they come in the same size bottle and they work just as well. But you really need the gel food coloring, not just regular liquid food coloring like you'd get at the store. So you want to make sure you have the gel food coloring. And then I have some tipless piping bags. So these are from Amazon. They are a little different than the kind you would just get at like Hobby Lobby or Michael's or something like that. They're a little bit textured. They're thinner than the normal piping bags that you see at the store, but they're easier to use for me anyway, because you don't have to have a piping tip for every single bag. You can just actually cut the tip of the bag however big you need it. I like them a lot. I wish I had found out about them sooner, and I don't know why anybody still just uses regular piping tips. Now for our succulents, we are going to use some piping tips just so that we can get the texture that we want on them, but for flooding and writing and stuff like that, I just use the tipless bags by themselves. I also have a glass because whenever it's time to fill our piping bags, I will put one in a glass like that, and then I can just fill it nice and easy. Alright, so this is pretty thick. I'm gonna start off with some like cactus green. One of the cookies that I'm doing is just gonna be a cactus. So for that, I'm gonna need thin and thick icing. So that's why I'm gonna show you this one first. You're gonna mix it in the separate bowl, of course. So I'm just gonna take a glob. I will be very upfront about the fact that measuring out how much icing I need is still not a strong suit for me. I always end up with way too much, and sometimes by the end of my icing batch I don't have enough for my last color, and then I have to make a little bit more. So there's a learning curve. I guess if I was really thorough I could weigh everything out, but I don't. So I'm just gonna start with that much because that's what fits in my bowl. And while I'm not using this, I wanna make sure to cover it up again so it doesn't dry out. You'll want to cover it up better than I did. I'm just going to start with this one, Colors Avocado. That looks kind of like a cactus, right? So just a couple drops, and I'm just going to mix it until it's all the same color. And you'll see, as soon as you start mixing it, you'll see if you're going to need more food coloring or not. I definitely need more in this batch. And I also might want to add a little bit of lime green just to make it a little bit more vivid, which I do have, but I didn't get it out. I'm just going to keep mixing it. Let me grab that lime green. Neon green, sorry. When you're doing something like this, where it's just plants and succulents and stuff, it's really not as big of a deal. It does take some practice if you're trying to match a color, because a lot of times the color on top of the little bottle isn't exactly what you're going to get with your icing. So what I'm going to do now that this is all mixed together and it's all one color, I'm going to take a little bit out. Not too much. When you're doing the piping, a little bit goes a long way for like writing and stuff. So I'm going to take this out and I'm going to put it in my bag. Maybe a little more. Just making sure you push it all the way down, and then what I do is I kind of stick the spatula in there and I grab it and I just slide it out to get off as much as I can. And then you want to push it as close to the tip as possible. It's okay if there's air down here because you're going to cut that anyway. And get as much pushed down as you can, and then you're just going to tie it up. So there's the first one, and like I said earlier, this is more of that toothpaste texture. So this is going to be good for our succulents because it'll stay, those peaks will stay. It'll stay in the shape that you originally pipe it in, and it won't like spread out at all. It'll stay exactly how you do it. So now that we have that, we're gonna start adding in water. So when I add in water, there's a couple different ways you can do it. One way is to get a spray bottle full of clean water and just spray a little bit at a time and keep mixing. Lately I've gotten lazy and I will just turn the sink on and I'll run my spatula under the water and mix, and run it under the water and mix. The main thing is you want to add water very small amounts at a time. Not only is it easy to get real runny real fast, but also when there's a lot of extra water added at once, it gets messier and it'll splatter, and I don't know, I just don't like making a mess. So I'm just gonna add just a little, is that like a 1/4 teaspoon of water? Just a little bit. And I'm gonna just keep mixing it. I'm gonna keep doing that until this looks more like shampoo instead of toothpaste. That was a little bit much. Okay, so one way that you can test it to see if it's going to be thin enough for you to flood your cookies with is the second test. I've heard it referred to as 20-second icing and 10-second icing. And if you ever see that or hear that, what it means is once you have it in your bowl and you're mixing it up, if you drag your spatula through it, it'll take however many seconds for the icing to meet back up and end up being completely smooth again. And that's without shaking it or anything like that. So this would probably be closer to 20-second icing. You can see that line is almost all the way gone now. And if I were to just pipe, you know, the flood layer onto my cookies, that first layer that's gonna end up as our base, this would probably be just fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and call this one done. Excuse my mess. I'm gonna get another bag, do the same thing, put it in my glass. And you'll see there's a noticeable difference in how thin it is. This will end up being able to dry in one smooth flat layer. If you're a little nervous about it, and if it's maybe your first time doing this, I would go for more of a 10-second icing. That still shouldn't run off the edges of your cookies, but it gives you a little more time to work with. If you've been doing it a while and you can do it pretty fast, then this should be good. This is about what I like because it dries faster. The less water is in it, the faster it'll dry. Yeah, so that should be good. And I'm only using this for cactus, which are pretty skinny anyway. They won't be too hard to flood. So I'm just gonna pour it all into my cup, scrape off as much as I can from the spoon. And now I'm ready to work on my other colors. The nice thing is if you're working on a similar color palette, so I'm just doing a bunch of different shades of green, I don't have to wash this all off in between. I can just pour some more white in here and get working on my next color. If I'm going, I want to do some like maroon in there too, I'll definitely wash the bowl out before I do that. But if you're doing a bunch of colors, what you'd want to do is, like, say you have a rainbow that you're working on, you'd want to start with yellow, and then you can do orange, and then maybe you can do red, and then maybe you could do purple. And just kind of work with it that way. I guess that's laziness, but I try to wash my bowl as few times as possible in between mixing, just to save time and dishes. And usually I'll just wash out my bowl and then keep going. Okay, a couple other things about the icing. You can keep it at room temperature in a sealed container for up to like 2 weeks. I know some people put it in the fridge for even longer. Some people even freeze it. I have never even bothered with fridge or freezer, just because I don't make huge quantities at one time. I can see if you were doing this constantly, you just wanted to have a bunch on standby. But I know some people that have tried it and it ends up kind of crystallizing again. That sugar in there crystallizes and they just don't ever quite get the same consistency. I'm sure there are ways you can do it where you will get the same consistency, but I don't even bother with that. I will, however, leave it out on the counter in a sealed up container. I've got some like Pyrex bowls with lids that are really airtight, and that works just fine. It will start to separate a little bit at the bottom. You'll see at the bottom there'll be like a little clear layer of like liquid at the bottom. You just have to mix it back up and it is fine. It is still gonna set up just fine. It's not gonna make anyone sick. It's still good to go. Another thing with this icing is you don't want to let any grease or oil touch it. Not so much oils in your hands, that shouldn't be too bad, but like you want to make sure the bowl that you're mixing it in has been cleaned really, really well. The spatula that you're using, you want to make sure there's no leftover grease residue on it from whatever you cooked with it last. I know some people will go above and beyond and even wipe out the inside of their bowl and their spatula with lemon juice to really kill and get rid of, not kill, but you know, get rid of all the grease that was on it. I just make sure everything's washed really, really well. I like to just pull it straight out of the dishwasher and put it right onto my mixer, just to make sure I know that it was just like completely sanitized and there's no more grease on it. So just be careful of that whenever you're mixing. Grease or oil of any sort will not let your icing set up. It'll kind of set and like it'll give you this false hope that it's going to set and it'll never set. So be careful of that. If you have any questions, you guys can reach out to me, but if you want to see how to use this icing and how to decorate, make sure you watch the next video.